Hey, what's up, everybody? This is attorney Dan Wynn here with the Intentional Entrepreneur Show. I have a very special guest with me today. She is the owner of Metaverse Law and a privacy and cybersecurity lawyer. She is a certified information privacy professional in both the United States and in Europe, and is the Orange County chapter chair for the International Association of Privacy Professionals. She holds a certification as a forensic analyst for advanced incident response, digital forensics, and assist her clients through the incident response and breach notification process. I'd like to welcome to the show my friend Lily Lee.
Hey, thanks for having me.
All right, my pleasure. You know, data and privacy law is always been kind of an interesting area to me, especially with obviously everything moving online, Internet of Things devices. So there's a lot of information out there that these companies will collect, and a lot of people kind of don't know either as an individual what the company's collecting, but even on the other side as a business owner, what are their responsibilities to safeguard that data and disclose to their customers and users. But before we kind of get all into that, can you share a little bit about yourself and how you got into this area of law?
Definitely. So I started out like a lot of people in general commercial litigation. Worked at a smaller boutique practice based in Orange County for a few years. And while I was at the practice, I started seeing more and more of my corporate clients having questions about these new data privacy laws that were coming up, in the United States and also abroad. And when I started to dig deep into this area, I realized, wow, there's a lot going on in this space. It involves high tech, cutting edge companies. And I'm a giant science fiction junkie. So I'm like, wow, if I could focus on this practice area, I could work with companies that I find really interesting and put my legal skills to use as well. So I launched my own practice, Metaverse Law, in March of 2018, right before GDPR passed, and also right before the California Consumer Privacy Act passed. So it's a pretty exciting time.
Now, was that on purpose with the timing, or it's just to happen to be a coincidence?
For GDPR, it was on purpose. Um, I misspoke a little earlier. It had passed a few years ago, but it went into effect May of 2018. And so I wanted to get ahead of the curve when I launched my practice. CCPA was a bit of a surprise. So that happened very, very quickly and hit us right in our own backyard.
Right, right. And I think probably still a lot of business owners who don't have the maybe they're just kind of just busy running their business, right? They haven't updated all the way they need to update, especially in California. Because my understanding, like you mentioned, California has their own privacy laws and typically are much stricter than the other 49 states. But in our business, everyone has their own practice areas, right? Business and your privacy or cybersecurity, and there's PI. Talk a little bit about kind of you as a business owner and an entrepreneur. Um, it's obviously something that you wanted to do, as you mentioned, but what was it like hard in the beginning? Because I think a lot of, especially service professionals, we get the advice that's, hey, you got to pick a practice area, right? It's really hard to be a very general practitioner. But for you, so someone who's been out about almost 3 years now on your own, how did you balance kind of marketing yourself as a very specific practice area? And sometimes those cases don't come in every day, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
At the beginning, I was all in on this practice area. And I find it incredibly exciting. But there is always this nervousness and hesitancy
Mm.
because, I mean, you're turning down general cases, you're turning down normal contract review, and you're focusing all of your marketing on just one area of law. At the same time, though, that risk really pays off over time. There are moments in the first 6 months where nothing was happening for weeks on end, and all I'd be doing was going to events, learning about privacy laws, introducing myself to people, or doing marketing.
Mhm.
But then when I ended up getting clients, a lot of them, first of all, will refer to me. I'd say over 90% of the work I get are through referrals because there aren't that many people that specialize in this space. And I think it adds a lot of value to clients too, because when you're learning something from scratch, which you have to do when you're a generalist, it can take a lot longer than talking to a specialist.
Mhm.
And if you are a larger company with a lot of privacy and cybersecurity needs, in the long run, it might make more sense to work with a specialist and have much shorter turnaround times for some of the often very pressing questions that you have in this space.
Yeah, and I think your experience brings up a good point as to, as far as efficiency goes as well, is, you know yeah, there's some variation, right, in the cybersecurity law, but they all involve cybersecurity. And I think if you do it long enough, you'll start seeing the same fact patterns and same issues over and over again. And in a sense, that makes your job servicing the client easier, because when your new client comes in, you're probably thinking, all right, the issues are probably one of 10 in this particular list. And I can kind of narrow down. Whereas if you're practicing like PI law and then business and then healthcare, you're like, your mind's all over the place and it's really hard to scale, so to speak, right? And focus down on the same particular issues that's happening over and over again.
That's right. And I think this is true in any area of law where, there's the black letter law, and then there's a lot of interpretive guidance and regulations where there is so much gray area.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it is based on general industry practices or what's reasonable in your industry.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very hard to know that unless you've had some experience seeing how different companies in the same space operate to get
Mm-hmm.
that baseline.
Yeah.
So it is very valuable if you want to pursue a specialty.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember I was listening to may have been Planet Money, or I think it was Planet Money. If you don't know what Planet Money is, it's a podcast put out by NPR, and they had a special episode about language. But in essence, it's boiled down to like, yeah, if you're looking for someone to speak a certain language, the more people there are that speaks that language, the less you can charge for it. So like, we're in the United States, we have a lot of Spanish speakers, right? So, you can have your whole choice of Spanish interpreters, but you need that one person to translate that dialect in the middle of Africa, right? The other guy's going to charge like 10 times more than the Spanish translator, because you can't find, it's not easy, to find. And I think where you've done really good job is similar, is like, this is a niche, it's a growing field, and you're the only one I know that does it, or maybe one of two. So still pretty good odds in getting cases. So let's kind of get down to the nitty gritty, and maybe what some the business owners that listen to the show need to know about cybersecurity. But you mentioned a couple of things at the beginning of the show: GDPR and CCPA. Can you briefly describe those two laws?
Definitely. I'll start with GDPR. That's the General Data Protection Regulation. And what's interesting is that it governs any business or nonprofit organization that collects the data of EU residents. So if you're offering goods or services to the EU, if you're monitoring the behavior of EU residents, or if you have operations in the EU, then you're covered. And it gives individuals a lot of rights, both to access their data, delete their data, get a copy of their data. And there are a lot of penalties if you misuse data or if you suffer a data incident and it's as a result of you not implementing security measures at your organization to protect that information. The reason I start with GDPR is that a lot of similar legislation is being passed all around the world in different countries, whether it's Brazil, Canada, India, China. And California's new law is interesting in that a lot of the concepts are taken from GDPR. So similar rights with respect to your data. But California is California, so it always wants to add special requirements. And so under California law, there are also special disclosure requirements if you are selling data or sharing data with third parties, especially in ways that your customers don't anticipate.
Right. Now, kind of going back to GDPR, we're in the global economy, right? And, there's the World Wide Web. So for someone who maybe doesn't particularly target, customers in the EU, but, somehow maybe they're selling widgets online and someone from the EU buys it. Now, that company's still subject to GDPR?
It's interesting because there is a bit of a balancing test to determine if a company is subject to GDPR. Just having a website that's available in your home country's language and is on the World Wide Web isn't enough to trigger GDPR. We're really looking at whether or not you are marketing to the EU. And some companies, they might unintentionally trigger GDPR coverage, even though they aren't targeting the EU. But for instance, they're paying their social media platforms to target worldwide audiences, including the EU. And so when you're a business, especially if you're on the smaller end, a lot of that intentionality in your marketing, in your website appearance, in what type of customers you're showcasing on your website, those are all factors that determine whether or not GDPR applies to you.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to have resources and someone like you to advise, companies that there's a lot of these nuances that, attorneys already have trouble, dealing with, right? Imagine like the normal business owner, normal CEO, and they're running their own business. They don't really have time to, understand all these nuances. Okay, so now I want to talk about, maybe just data protection and privacy in general. So obviously, there's a lot of people using social media, using obviously email for a very long time. If you can share with us maybe, 3 things that every business owner should know about, data and security law that they can, they can use and say, hey, maybe I need to revisit some of my things and maybe contact someone like you.
Well, one guide that I think every business owner should know about is the Center for Internet Security Controls. This is an online resource called the CIS Controls that lists some of the most important things you need to do as a business to lock down your systems. And they create this list of 20 controls based on the most common threats that businesses suffer from the internet. The great thing about this guide is that it's got different levels based on the size of your company. So it's not a one-size-fits-all guide. And if you're a smaller business, you're looking at some of the low-hanging fruit. And then if you're a bigger business, obviously you want to fulfill a lot more of the requirements. The CIS controls are very interesting too, because they've been referenced by the California Attorney General as potential reasonable security controls. Another thing that businesses should definitely consider is really talking to their employees about email security and how to recognize fake or phishing emails. It's sad to say that, there are so many sophisticated hackers and all these folks out there, and yet over 80% of hacks occur because someone clicked a link from a phishing email. To be fair, a lot of these emails are starting to look more and more sophisticated and less like, I'm a prince from a foreign country, click on this link,
Yeah,
money.
yeah.
But you still see some unforced errors where Outlook or Gmail is alerting you that this is a potential phishing email, and yet sometimes people click those. So yes, talking to your employees. Something else that businesses should do, and again, this is low-hanging fruit. CIS controls, you should definitely look at that. But we're all working from home. I mean, not all of us, but a lot of us are. And if you have a Wi-Fi router, it has a default password, and oftentimes that default password is admin. So please go check and change the default password on your Wi-Fi router, so you don't have a situation where someone can walk by your home, log into your Wi-Fi router, and get all of your internet traffic. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I read that, what Amazon's doing is, if you have, Alexa and some of their internet products, they're kind of by default, I guess, opening up the Wi-Fi, at least to that particular device. So the idea was, or is, to, like, if, maybe your neighbor's walking down the street and they need Wi-Fi, they have access. But I think as a consumer, for security reasons, for sure, I wouldn't want that. So, that plus, working out of the house, creates like a security nightmare.
That's right. And, one thing that's often a good idea is that if your Wi-Fi router has two different settings, two different passwords, make sure, your smart TV and all of those smart products are on one system, and your proprietary confidential work stuff is on a completely different system, so you don't have that issue.
Yeah. And speaking of like phishing, I think it gets back to like social engineering, right? Like people are people, right? And I read an article recently that GoDaddy, they send an email. I haven't verified this, so take it for what it's worth. They send an email to the employees like, oh, there's a Christmas bonus, click here. But it was actually a phishing security test against their own employees. And so, I mean, you can debate whether that was, appropriate given the holidays, and I don't know, maybe it was, but you're certainly right. Is a lot of, I think, I think you mentioned the statistics, 80 or 90% are just phishing or social engineering. So that means that a very low percentage is like, brute force, what you see on movies, or one guy's at the computer typing 1,000 words a minute, just breaking into the bank or something.
That's right. I mean, everyone's lazy to a certain extent, and hackers are no exception. So if they can get you with you just clicking a link, that's the way they'll go.
Yeah. I think Bill Gates, that said, if I want to find the fastest way to do something, I don't hire the smartest guy, I hire the laziest guy, because they'll figure out how to do it. Okay. We talk about like all these breaches and some liabilities for the company. I know there's companies out there that offer cybersecurity insurance. Do you have any take on that, and if it's good for businesses to invest into a policy like that?
Well, right now, the cost of the policies versus the amount of liability that the insurance companies will cover, it's generally a good deal. So if you can afford a cybersecurity insurance policy and your business really runs on data, then I definitely consider purchasing a policy. The interesting thing, though, is that cyber insurance policies, they're fairly new. So they don't operate off of the same standard forms as a lot of property insurance or, car insurance. And for some really high volume types of attacks, like social engineering, cybercrime, wire fraud, sometimes that's specifically excluded from the cyber insurance policy, and you have to ask your insurer for those to be endorsed or added to the policy. So very good idea to have one, but really pay attention to the fine print, because you might not be buying what you think you're buying.
Right, right. And, we talk about, best practices and, how to get, the low hanging fruit, and maybe kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about how do you identify maybe a breach, or when it's right to bring someone like you in to respond to an incident, like, hey, I lost my data, or someone's holding it ransom and I got to pay them by Bitcoin. What's, what would you say to that business owner is the next step?
Well, if don't wait until you're thinking about opening, a cryptocurrency account and you're on the page. Right. But generally, you want to bring in an attorney if there's any chance that you might trigger breach notification requirements, either to customers or to regulators. Mm-hmm. And some things that you really need to watch for: sensitive details, credit card information, medical information, for people in the EU, information about sexual orientation, things that you would consider very personal. Also pay attention to your customer contracts. They might be a lot broader than your notification obligations under law. And so they might require you to notify them of, general vulnerabilities in your systems or things like that. And the contracts are getting a lot stricter as time goes on. So personal information, sensitive information, customer proprietary information, that's when you bring in an attorney.
Yeah. And speaking of contracts, I've seen it was an addendum to this particular industry where, consent to use cloud and email, right? Mm-hmm. It's like, hey, email and cloud is inherently not secure. And, you're consenting for us to use this. So yeah, I've seen, those precautions taken in some particular industries.
That's right. On the other hand, though, people who think that everything's secure because they don't use the cloud, they have to be very careful too, because it's like holding all your eggs in one basket. And if you suffer a fire or an earthquake and you're holding everything on your physical systems, you could lose all your data that way too. So yeah, definitely consider like how you would deal with all types of emergencies, not just an attack on the cloud system.
Yeah. And I remember I had a friend who she learned the lesson painfully, was working out of her home and had, these external hard drives. She was actually relaxing, working on her bed, got up, the hard drive fell over to the ground. So it was one of these older hard drives with the spinning disc. Mm-hmm. And, this called the click of death, right? You hear the hard drive clicking. That means that's bad news. Ended up paying hundreds of dollars to a data recovery specialist to recover it. And so I used to teach a class on running your business, and the particular section about data and backup was like, hey, you got to have, like, one is none, right? So if you just have it on your computer, that's basically as the same as not having any protection. If you have two, there's actually one, because if one goes down, then you only have one, one left over. So the ideal, I think, at minimum is like you have 3 spaces, right? Wherever it is, you have 3 spaces to back up your data, so that if 2 of them go down, at least you have one right. space to go back. Yeah. This topic is so interesting. Just given, obviously we're all mostly moving to the cloud. A lot of the things, since we are, as you mentioned, working at home, a lot of it's computer-based, internet-based. And what kind of do you see as if you can predict the future, what would you say is a trend in your particular area and how it will affect companies?
I think a lot of companies a couple of years ago said, I am not affected by GDPR. So I won't care about, reviewing data flows in my organization or getting compliant. Now companies are going, well, I don't think I'm covered by GDPR. I don't think I'm covered by the California law. But like I said, Canada is developing a new privacy law. India is developing a new privacy law. There's a lot happening in South America, Middle East. And so at a certain point, if you say, I'm not going to comply with privacy and cybersecurity laws, you're saying, I don't want to be a big company. I don't want to grow globally. And something else, which is a good news for businesses, is that a lot of these laws copy each other. And so sometimes it's difficult to be 100% compliant with everything. It costs so much. But if you can get substantial compliance and you can develop a framework for your company that works across multiple jurisdictions, so you're not doing the same type of work for every single jurisdiction.
Yeah. Now, have you seen any penalties thrown down, and how it's just fairly new, right? So if you have have you seen any penalties put down by either the EU or California on some of the violations of the privacy laws?
Yes. So more so in Europe. There have been quite a few fines already by different regulatory authorities, and they range from small medical clinics all the way to big consulting companies. The largest fines have generally been in the mega breaches, like with British Airways. There was a big mega breach, but they have given 10,000, 40,000 euro fines to smaller companies, especially if they hold sensitive records. In California, the California Consumer Privacy Act only went into effect January of this year, and the regulations didn't come out until the middle of this year. And so we haven't seen any fines yet. We have seen a few class actions based on large data breaches that have alleged CCPA as a cause of action. And we've already started to see the beginnings of investigations and enforcement actions. So the Attorney General's office has already sent out notices to some companies under CCPA, even though the regs just came out over the summer. So it's moving at a much faster pace than a lot of businesses even know about.
Yeah. Wow. Lots of stuff. And certainly, especially if you are a company that holds a lot of data that they should be aware of. All right. This has been a very fascinating discussion. Now let's kind of go into the lightning round of questions. All right. This is called just answer the first thing that pops in your head. And this question's just involving or related to you as an entrepreneur and a business owner. Okay. You ready? All right. Who do you look up to?
I look up to, I know he's passed, but Ray Bradbury. He's one of my favorite science fiction authors, and he's just so forward thinking.
Yeah. All right. What's the best business book that you've read?
The best business book that I've read? Oh, I actually don't read that many business books.
All right. Let me, since you're a science fiction buff, what's the best science fiction book have you read?
This one's a little bit out there, but Hard-Boiled Wonderland and the End of the World by Haruki Murakami. He's generally not a science fiction writer, but this is one of those works that's amazing.
All right. If you can do one thing over again, what would it be?
I think when I first started my practice, I probably should have gotten help earlier.
All right.
It would have been a bigger risk, but it would have been helpful.
All right. Um, what's the biggest challenge in your business today?
Learning how to do the work and also manage other people, especially in a very virtual and remote environment. I mean, onboarding people virtually is a very strange experience.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's way different, right? As we can probably agree. All right, and finally, you lose everything. The only thing you have is your computer, your cell phone, and an internet connection. How do you rebuild your business in 30 days?
Oh, I could do it in 5 minutes. I mean, that's all I'm using right now.
Yeah, just restore the image, right?
That's right. Okay, I reset the computer.
Runtime machine again. All right. Good answer. All right. Hey, this has been fantastic. If we're a business owner and we want to kind of get our company up to speed on cybersecurity and make sure we're kosher, how do we get in touch with you?
You can definitely email me. Um, you can use info@metaverselaw.com, and you can go to metaverselaw.com, our website, to just learn more about what we do.
All right, and I'll put these links on the show notes so people can easily access it. And thanks again, Lily. It's been really fun having you on the show here, and a very fascinating topic. So I know we can probably spend hours on not talking about this, but we'll break it up for the sake of sanity here.
Sounds good. Thanks again for having me, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.